Today, we celebrate two important events. One being the Christian prayer day named Rogation Sunday, or the beating of the bounds. And the other is a secular holiday commonly known as Mother's Day. Rogation Sunday is traditionally the fifth Sunday after Easter. And we normally celebrate it, in part at least, by walking the bounds of the church, beseeching a divine blessing upon those parish lands and for any crops thereon, and praying for a good harvest to come. It would have been particularly appropriate this year, as we do in fact have a small garden on our property. The beating of the bounds in the past involved marking the bounds of the church property by actually striking the boundary lines with willow branches or birch branches. But that is no longer necessary with today's surveying techniques. The other important event, as I said, is Mother's Day. The day we publicly express our love and reverence for the mothers of our country. Now, as I said, we had planned on walking the bounds of our property today, but with the rain, I was not about to ask the women to walk around the property lines in wet grass and mud. I'm just not that brave. No, we truly do appreciate mothers far more than that. And to show it today, I'm going to deviate a little bit from preaching the gospel and concentrate on Mother's Day. Let me begin by saying that in all that God has created, mothers must be one of His greatest creations. They are certainly one of the most beautiful, most kind, and most loving creatures God ever created. Mothers are indeed a reflection of God. Now, to be sure, not all mothers are perfect. Some have their flaws, but in truth, there is not a more loving creature in God's good world. A mother will do almost anything to protect her family, her children, those she most loves. Motherhood is one of life's highest callings. As I was researching this sermon, I looked on the internet for topics dealing with motherhood. And I came across this article describing God's creation of mothers. It was written by Irma Bombeck many years ago in the form of a newspaper column. And some of you probably remember Irma Bombeck. She was the American humorist who not only wrote articles that were published in some 900 newspapers in the U.S. and Canada, but also had some 15 books published during the mid-1960s until the late 1990s. She even became a TV personality of sorts in the 70s and 80s. But back to the novel that she wrote on God's creation of a mother. And I'm sure all mothers, young and old, here in the pews today, will understand exactly what she was saying. According to Bombeck, one day God was in heaven, and he was creating a mother. When one of his angels walked by, saw what he was doing, and made some comment that he was spending a lot of time on this creation. And God looked at him and said, "Have you seen the specs for this model? She must be nearly indestructible." And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. "And yet she must be tender and have a kiss that will heal all wounds, from a broken leg to a broken heart. She must be equipped with a lap when she sits down on which to comfort her children. She must be able to function on a cup of coffee and a few leftovers she may grab during the day. And she is supposed to have 6 pairs of hands to do the work she must do." And the angel shook his head and asked in amazement, "Is that even possible?" And God answered him, "It's not the 6 pairs of hands that I'm worried about, but the 3 pairs of eyes that are to come with this model." And the angel asked, "Why? Why does she need 3 pairs of eyes?" To which God responded, "One to see through closed doors when she asks her children, 'What are you doing in there?' She needs another pair in the back of her head to see things that are going on behind her. And then she needs another pair in the front that can look at a child who did something wrong, and through those eyes communicate love without ever saying a word." "That is an awful lot for one model," said the angel. "Yes, I know," said God, "but I am trying to create someone very much like myself. In other words, a miracle worker. Someone who can heal herself when she is sick. Someone who can feed a family of 6 with a pound of meat. And someone who can convince her 9-year-old son of the need to take a shower at night." The angel then touched the mother and said, "She is so soft." And God responded, "Don't let that fool you. For she is very tough. And you will be surprised at how much she can do when I am finished." The angel touched her again, this time on the cheek. When he withdrew his hand, it was wet. And he said laughingly, "This one has sprung a leak. You put too much into her." And God said, that's not a leak. That's a tear. 1,000 of which you will shed over a lifetime. Tears of sadness and sorrow, of disappointment, but also tears of joy and pride. And God said, there are just a few finishing touches to add, such as reason, compassion, understanding, and kindness, and so many other good things. And then, with a few modifications, he sent his creation to earth. And we who are fortunate enough to have realized the specialness, the uniqueness of his creation, should be ever thankful to God, the Creator. As I continue to work on my sermon, I searched for the perfect example of motherhood. And perhaps in a way, owing to my background, my theological training, my mind quickly went to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and incidentally, the subject of Earth's self-composed sermon hymn this morning. Mary was a young peasant woman who accepted God's will for her life. Unmarried, never having known a man, she agreed to bear the Son of God. She fully knew that by doing so, she would suffer enormous shame and pain. And she did suffer with him through his ministry, through his passion. And she watched as he died on the cross. She was the epitome of motherhood. But many modern mothers have also suffered much and made great sacrifices for their children. Most recently, I read the story of one Stephanie Decker, the mother who, in protecting her children from the ravages of a tornado in Indiana, lost both of her legs and is now learning to walk again with prosthetic legs. Again, no sacrifice is too much for a mother. And I know each of you mothers sitting in the pews here today have made many sacrifices for your children and for your family. But you know, not all is serious in the life of a mother. Sometimes there are humorous incidents that confront a mother in rearing her children. Things happen despite her best efforts of trying to teach them to be responsible. I remember one time in my youth, I was, I don't know, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. And my mother told me to watch my younger sister, Brenda, who was, 3 or 4 years old at the time. My mother had to go to the basement for a few minutes to see if the clothes had finished washing. And I, of course, told her, I would watch her. Well, when my mother left, my sister was sitting on a chair at the kitchen table, and she was eating something. And I took my eye off of her, Just a minute, mind you. Just a very short minute. And all of a sudden I heard this thump. And I heard the dishes breaking on the floor. And Brenda was crying. Well, of course, with all that commotion, my mother came bounding up the stairs. And when she saw my sister on the floor and food all over the floor, she said, "I thought I told you to watch her." And I said, "I did watch her." And my mother agreed. "Oh, you watched her all right. You watched her fall to the floor. You watched her spill food all over the floor." And I, in a feeble attempt to defend myself, I meekly said, "Well, I did what you told me." Needless to say, that was not a very pleasant day for me. But you know, we all know that being a mother is certainly not an easy job. Sometimes there's great joy. Sometimes there's overwhelming sadness. Sometimes great pride. And other times there are not enough tissues to dry your tears. But you carry on. But you know, perhaps the most important thing you will ever do is to teach your children to know God. Teach them of His love. Teach them His commandments. Teach them His forgiveness and His sacrifice. If you do that, or if you have done that, your job is complete, and you will be rewarded. I can only conclude by saying thank God for mothers, one of God's greatest blessings. Remember the words of